All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel right here with the very best bloggers, broadcasters, writers in the industry, including an analysis from myself as well. We are making our way through the SEC, arguably the best conference in college football, and looking at each position and ranking our top five. If you enjoyed the audio, go to Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher, and just search Mark Rogers TV. We've got Mike LaValle and Kevin McGuffey, double team from Last Word on College Football. You got to go to Last Word on College Football and check out their work along with our guy, Tony Siracusa. How are we all doing tonight?
Mark, doing great. Always a pleasure to join you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, likewise, doing well. Like I said, it's always great to come on and talk football with you guys.
It seemed like the SEC at wide receiver, and we'll point everyone to the quarterbacks and running backs live stream that we did last week to check out those top fives and make your comparisons. And we'll be keeping our eye on the live chat as well to get your breakdown there as well. But two things I think of when I think SEC wide receiver, and maybe it was the heyday of the position maybe about 5 years ago when we had the likes of Mike Evans and Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry and Amari Cooper, and we could go on with the talented wide receiver in this league. I think it was the most loaded position of any conference in college football at any position, and that's saying a lot when you've got D-end and corner in the SEC, and it was just ridiculous. Maybe taking a bit of a step back, but still plenty of talent, and the likes of Christian Kirk and Jamon Moore and Calvin Ridley moving on to the next level. The other thing is when you think the positions that we've already covered, Mike and Kevin, and going at the wide receivers tonight, of course, the very first thing you look at are stats. But if you go to the national leaders and you're expecting to see SEC wide receivers, there's two main reasons why you don't see a whole lot of SEC players in that gaudy statistical realm of 100 catches and 15 and 1,600 yards, like you'll see these guys from the Mountain West and the Big 12 littering the statistical categories. The defenses are just too doggone good to allow that kind of ridiculous play. And number two, the style of offense, although it has been impacted in recent years in the SEC. You still have your LSUs and Alabamas that are going to be conservative with a conservative approach offensively. And when I say conservative, that means throwing 30 times a game these days is conservative. So, Mike, with that narrative in play, we'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, certainly, Mark. I think when a lot of fans look at the returning receivers in the conference this year, there's not going to be a lot of names that pop out to them immediately. If you go back to our discussion about the top five running backs, another reason is because you look at how many running backs the conference lost last year. Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Bo Scarborough, Darius Geis, Ralph Webb at Vanderbilt. I mean, I think we had 6, 7, 8 guys drafted in the NFL from the SEC. So the number of snaps when you have that much talent at running back in the conference in 2017, that limits the number of plays you're going to get to wide receivers in 2017. When you lose the top three or three of the top 4 receivers that you already mentioned, Javon Moore, Calvin Ridley, and Christian Kirk at Texas A&M, that's less touches for the receivers. So I think some of the fans will be will not. Some of these names for the top 5 returning wide receivers won't pop out to some of the fans, but they're still quality guys. When I've composed my top 5, I really had I think the top 3 for me is pretty clear. And I had about 4 guys that had to slot in 4 and 5. So Brian Edwards from South Carolina and Jonathan Johnson from Missouri did not make the cut. They were 6 and 7 on my list. So I'll just start with my top 5 here. At 5, I had Juwan Jennings from Tennessee, a guy whose name's not going to pop out for a lot in the conference unless you're a Tennessee fan, because he didn't play in 2017. He was injured the entire season, but in 2016 he had 4 catches for 580 yards, 7 TDs, 14.5 yards per catch. He might be best known for catching the Hail Mary, the Dobbs-Nell boot in the Georgia game 2 years ago that won Tennessee that game. He split the catches with Josh Malone that year. Of course, Malone was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. You talked about stat lines with the receivers. Here's why Juwan Jennings is so important for Tennessee. He's a locker room leader. His attitude and his leadership in the locker room, particularly in a time of turmoil and transition at Tennessee, is going to be critical for that team. He was actually booted off the team last year for some very poor social media etiquette. So he needs to mature a little bit. But when you look at locker room leadership and guys with attitude who bring the toughness to the team, very rarely does it come from a wide receiver position. Usually it comes from a running back, or most often a linebacker or a strong safety, or maybe one of the linemen. Very rarely does it come from the wide receiver position. So that's what I love about Juwan Jennings, is he brings both the production and the attitude from that wide receiver position. He's really, amongst the players, he's kind of the heart and soul of that locker room. And if he can mature a little bit, he's going to be a great leader moving forward. He's got all the physical tools to make a difference. At number 4, we're going down to the Plains. I'm looking at Ryan Davis, 5'9", 175. So he's that typical slot receiver. He can play the Z position. He's very versatile in that offense. Of course, the Gus Malzahn offense needs a lot of versatility, a lot of speed interwoven with the wide receivers. Last year, he had 84 receptions. That's tops in the conference. You're talking about production. There you go from your slot / your Z position receiver. 815 yards, 5 touchdowns. So obviously with 84 receptions, a little bit lower on the yards per catch stat there, but that's exactly what you want from your slot or your Z receivers, is those receptions. I love his consistency. His splits, his statistical splits are very even. Early game, late game, against good teams, against bad teams. He had more catches on first down. 40% of his catches came on first down. But while he only had 20% of his catches on third down, he had 14 yards per catch on third down. So he was very effective when he was called on in third down. The only question about him is his size. I know his slot receivers aren't normally large guys, in zone fade guys, but in the SEC, you're going to have size if you're going to play any position. So we're looking at Ryan Davis there at Auburn. If Jared Stidham can have a good year, Davis is going to have a breakout year. At number 3, I think the top 3 to me are pretty clear. I have Emmanuel Hall, Missouri, 6'3", 200. Of course, if you're catching passes from Drew Lock, you're going to have a pretty good stat line. Last year, 33 receptions, 817 yards, 8 touchdowns. That might not sound like a powerful stat line, but you got to remember he was sharing that with Javon Moore, Jonathan Johnson, and Albert Okwuegbunam. So he's splitting that really 3 ways and still had 817 yards and 8 touchdowns, 24.76 yards per catch. When you talk about big play potential, there's your guy right there. A little bit of a question on durability, a little bit of a question about, is he a system wide receiver? How does he project to the next level at 6'3", 200? Usually when you have those tall guys going to the NFL, you want to have a little bit more mass on him, but he's still got at least a year to go. Great height, very balanced splits as well, much like Ryan Davis. His consistency is there. At number 2, Deebo Samuel, South Carolina, 6'2", 205. If you look at 2016, 2017, he missed 3 games in 2016, only played in 3 games in 2017. So you put those 2 together, you get one 13-game season. So here's that stat line for those 2 seasons combined: 74 receptions, over 1,000 yards, only 4 touchdowns in the air, but he has another 7 rushing touchdowns. You would think that defenses in the NFL, once they get inside the 30 or 40, would actually cover him on the reverses. You would think that after having 7 touchdowns on about 30 carries, incredible touchdown to carry ratio for Deebo Samuel. But he does have 14 yards per carry. And he's, there's probably no receiver that's more important to his team than Deebo Samuel. Super athletic. He adds a unique and irreplaceable role on that South Carolina team, but he is a little bit undersized. Again, we go with the undersized, both in height and a little bit on the weight. And then at number 1, my top returning receiver in the SEC, A.J. Brown from Ole Miss, 6'1", 225, prototypical size there. Stat lines last year, 75 receptions, over 1,252 yards, 11 touchdowns. Both the yardage and the touchdowns and the yards per game were number 1 in the conference. He had 104 yards per game. That's 21% more than the second place guy, and it's 40% more yards per game than the next best returning wide receiver. From a production standpoint, he stands alone as the best returning receiver in the SEC. Of course, as Jordan Ta'amu progresses and develops as a quarterback, that's probably only going to get better. He does need to step up with some consistency issues. He had 9 TDs at home last year, only 2 away, 10 TDs in wins, only 1 in losses, and only 1 TD against a ranked team, 10 TDs against unranked team. If he wants to be truly the best receiver in the SEC, he's going to have to step up, and be much more consistent against all levels of play. He's going to have to be a key production person for Ole Miss if they want to move up back up into the SEC West. So again, that's my top 5 receivers in the SEC. Brown at 1, Debo Samuel at 2, Hall there at Missouri at 3, Ryan Davis at 4, Jennings at 5. Honorable mention, Brian Edwards at South Carolina, Jonathan Johnson at Missouri. Kevin, what about you?
Well, my list is pretty similar to yours, just in a different order. I did have Jennings as like number 7 on my list. And another player who was just right off of the top 5 was a guy that Kentucky fans know very well, DK Metcalf, also from Ole Miss. He's the guy that caught the incredible touchdown pass at the back of the end zone to cost the Cats a victory last year. My top 5, I have started out with Jalen Osmond from Texas A&M. He had 50 catches, 370 yards, and 3 touchdowns as a true freshman last year. You think with Jimbo Fisher's system, those numbers are only going to get better. 4, I had Debo Samuel. I'm really looking for big things from South Carolina this year. Looking for big things from him. The broken ankle he suffered in the Kentucky game last year. The first play of that game, he came out. Bentley hit him for a touchdown, and it looked like they were on their way. And then after he got hurt, it kind of took the wind out of their sails. Number 3, I have Ryan Davis at number 3 on my list. Emmanuel Hall is second on mine. And then I have A.J. Brown as number 1 on my list of receivers. And as I said, I had Jennings and Metcalf as like 2 guys, the also receiving votes category, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, DK Metcalf, a nice season last year for the Rebels. Shea Patterson obviously started the season, got hurt, and Jordan Ta'amu took over from there. And really, the Rebels didn't miss much of a beat. Metcalf caught 39 for 646 through the air, 7 touchdowns. DeMarcus Lodge on the other side, another guy to keep your eye out. Not an elite receiver in the league, but 2 years ago, caught 15 passes for 2 touchdowns, didn't play a whole lot. Then he broke onto the scene as a junior. Last year, DeMarcus Lodge for the Ole Miss Rebels, and they have one of the finest wide receiver bunches in the nation. DeMarcus Lodge at 41 catches for 698 yards and 7 touchdowns. Mike mentioned Brian Edwards, who I remember playing his first game for South Carolina on the road against Vanderbilt on a Thursday night, as we all anticipate that first Thursday night game, and it was South Carolina and Vandy. And Brian Edwards, with Vandy having South Carolina on the ropes, made a couple tremendous catches, one deep down the sideline, bailing them out of their own end zone. And he's a big play guy for South Carolina, who caught 64 passes and 5 touchdowns last year. And Mike, you alluded to a couple points I'd like to make. Debo Samuel may not be the best, but may be the most important, and it's a fairly easy case to make based on what he can do as both a receiver and on special teams, and because of just him being a unique player, both in that offense and in the entire scope of that football team, with 6 touchdowns just in 3 games to open the season. And Emmanuel Hall, I'm always enamored with guys like him who don't catch it a whole lot, but may get 3 catches in a game and it goes for like 113 yards because he's downfield and making big plays each and every time. 24.8 per catch is pretty stout, but it seems pretty consensus that A.J. Brown from Ole Miss, and the numbers coming out of high school even. So this guy has been projected toward greatness and had that thought process concerning all the coaches and scouts as the 4th rated wide receiver coming out of high school and a top 35 player according to the 247 composite overall in the country. And with Jordan Ta'amu just gaining more and more confidence and comfort in the Ole Miss offense, he should really take off and continue just to put up big numbers for an Ole Miss team that's going to be fun to watch. They may not win a whole bunch of games, and of course restricted from postseason play, but the offense is going to be very fun to watch. So Kevin, we will move out to those guys, and this becoming more of a gray area as we move along and as the offenses develop in college football between the tight ends and the wide receivers. And tight end, like every other position in the SEC, has been stout in recent years with the likes of O.J. Howard and Hunter Henry. Your top 5 coming into 2018, Kevin?
All right. Well, first we'll start with my number 6. Just missing the top 5 is Georgia's Isaac Nada. He had he had a much better season 2 years ago, but with Michelle and with their running game, he was a little not quite as featured in the offense. But you're thinking now, with the quarterback situation they have there, their passing game is going to be pretty stout this year. Going through my list, number 5, I've got Irv Smith from Alabama. He had kind of a similar situation. He had 14 catches, 128 yards, 3 touchdowns last season. But you're figuring, I'm still thinking that when they kick off the season against Louisville, that Tagliaola is going to be the quarterback. And I think the numbers for all the receivers, you still have Damian Harris and everything in the backfield, but I think the receivers numbers, especially maybe the tight ends, are going to pick up this year. Number 4, it's a newcomer to the league. I've got Jay Sternberger from Texas A&M. He's a JUCO transfer who came in this season. He had just as something to go on, he had 8 catches, 147 yards, and 2 touchdowns just in the spring game. And as you guys well know, the tight ends are always been a big part of Jimbo Fisher's offense. And I think that's somebody who's going to have a big season. Continuing with the Ole Miss theme, number 3, I've got Dawson Knox. He had, like I said, I think they're going to be pass happy, as you guys are saying. I think there's going to be a lot of Ole Miss games are going to be like 50-42 or 51-42. He had 24 catches last season, 321 yards. He didn't have any touchdowns, but he did average almost 13 yards a catch. Number 2, got to rep the Kentucky Wildcats here. I got C.J. Conrad. He's a senior. He had 16 catches last season, 286 yards, 4 touchdowns. There is, you were talking about earlier with, Samuel and a couple of those other guys. He has been a bit injury prone. He's never made it through an entire season, played every game an entire season, only played 7 games, last year due to a foot injury, and he did not practice at all in the spring. And but Coach Stoops says he's going to be good to go, come September. And I think whether it be Terry Wilson or Gunnar Hoke, whoever's going to be Kentucky's quarterback, that first game against Central Michigan, I think Conrad is going to be somebody who's going to be an integral part of the offense. And we'll see. Like I said, I think I'm looking for big things from him this year. And of course, then the number 1 pick is out of Missouri, Albert Okabunam. He had big numbers as a true freshman last year, 29 catches, 415 yards, and 11 touchdowns. And you figure with Drew Lock there, he's going to be those numbers. Much like the situation with Ole Miss. I think Missouri is going to throw up 45, 48 points a game every game this year. And like I said, he's going to get, those numbers are just going to go up farther, higher and higher this season. So that's my top 5 plus 1.
Kevin, we gave you the honors of pronouncing the Missouri tight end's last name first, so Mike can play off that one.
No, I talked about Okwabanum.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike actually talked about him, I think, on his receivers. But
you did throw it out there, didn't you?
Emmanuel Hall, splitting catch with Emmanuel Hall. Kevin, I think that's a great list. I'm in a similar area here. At 5, I have Dawson Knox at Ole Miss, 6'4", 250, great size there. 13 yards per catch. What I like about Knox is he's a former walk-on, played quarterback in Nashville in high school. So I like the grit and determination. It's always a great story when a former walk-on can have success like Knox is having there at Ole Miss. At number 4, I have Foster Moreau, LSU, 6'6", 250. I love this guy. Great size. Pro Football Focus ranks him as the number 1 run blocker in FBS last season. 476 total run blocks, 3rd in the nation. He included 278 yards reception, 208 yards in receiving, 11 plus yards per catch. But I love that old school tight end that's not afraid to put his hand in the dirt and contribute in the running game as well. So I think he's probably the most versatile tight end returning in the conference, and I love those guys. That's really what the tight end position's about. Be able to catch it when you have to and contribute in the run game as well. At 3, I have Isaac Nada. He definitely dipped last year. 2017 wasn't as good as 2016, but if you look at his production both years as a freshman and a sophomore, Certainly, I think there's potential, and he's kind of proven himself. 5 total TDs, almost 500 total yards over the 2 seasons. But here's the thing about Nana: 12 plus yards per catch, very dependable. Particularly, in the third down situations, they're gonna really rely on him. Without that battering ram of Michelle and Chubb back there, I mean, they still have a great backfield there. But you knew what you had in Chubb and Michelle. We think we know what we have in Holyfield and Swift, but at the same time, they haven't proven themselves as Michelle and Chubb did. So I think Isaac Nana is going to be a key for Georgia in the possession game this year, moving the chains on third down. At number 2, I have C.J. Conrad out of Kentucky. Missed a little bit of last season, but he's played. He's a 3-year letterman at Kentucky, brings some stability to that team, brings some leadership to that team, great size, and very consistent. His stats, his split stats per game, situational stats, all that are very consistent as well. So I agree with you that Conrad's one of the best returning guys. And number 1, Mark, you said that tight end was a gray area. I think number 1 returning tight end is crystal clear. Albert Okwuegbunam there at Missouri, 415 yards, 11 receiving touchdowns, which leads the conference last year as a tight end. Tremendous athleticism, 14 yards per catch. Again, he had a split receptions with Javon Moore, Jonathan Johnson, Emmanuel Hall. Just a offensive powerhouse there in Columbia. We've talked about this before. I'm really interested to see how that works with Derek Dooley, the new offensive coordinator. But this is something I talked about with Drew Lock last week with you, Mark, as well. Drew Lock doesn't look as big on television as he looks on the stat sheet. Okwuegbunam is the same way. He's actually the biggest of all the tight ends we've talked about, 6'5", 260. You look at him on the field, he doesn't look like he's a 260. Tremendous athleticism for that size. And, you look at that and you got to think that's a tremendous matchup difficulty, particularly in the red zone against defense. Who are you going to put against that guy? Are you going to put a linebacker that's probably slower than him? Or are you going to put a safety that's probably smaller than him? He presents that classic Tony Gonzalez matchup problem that we watched in Atlanta for years. I think that's the 5 best returning guys. I'm a little bit disappointed in you, Kevin. I actually thought we were going to get through 1 full episode with 2 full positions without talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide, but you had to throw Irv Smith in there at number 5. I thought we were going to get away without talking about Alabama for 1 show, but you ruined it for me.
Well, if he's anything like O.J. Howard, if Smith turns out to be anything like O.J. Howard, you can't look at the stat line. I'm not going to compare him to O.J. Howard at this point, who turned out to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. But O.J. Howard was putting out those kind of stat lines, something similar to that, until late in his career at Alabama. But we all knew how good he was, and then came playoff games and national championship games, and the guy was a Mack truck running down the field with passes from Jay Coker and others, and couldn't be stopped.
Yeah, but Irv Smith his season last year wasn't an O.J. Howard season. I think his 3 touchdowns were against Tennessee, LSU, and Mercer. That's sure. two gimmies at Mercer and Tennessee when they were up by about 100 points at the end. And then, the one against, he had pretty good, I think 2 or 3 receptions against LSU with a touchdown. So, I think he had really, in my opinion, 1 legit game in 2017. But hey, he plays for Alabama, so you have to at least consider him. I'll give you that, Kevin. I was just hoping we can make it through 1 show about the SEC without talking about Alabama.
And Mike, apparently I need to remind you of this. This is not a review of the 2017 season. This is a projection toward 2018.
No doubt. No, we had that conversation as well.
But the other thing about the gray area, basically, I was just setting us up for the forever lessening dividing line between the wide receiver position and the tight end position, not necessarily who the better tight ends were in the league, but the a la Evan Ingram of Ole Miss, the guy that's really a wide receiver playing tight end, didn't know exactly how to, out of these guys. I know Nada's a legitimate tight end. Irv Smith is certainly a legit tight end. And one more time on the Missouri tight end's name.
Okwuegbunam.
Yeah.
Okwuegbunam.
Okwuegbunam. Yeah.
Oak. Emphasis on Okwuegbunam. Okwuegbunam.
Okay. We just call him Albert.
Okwuegbunam.
I saw Missouri play Texas in a bowl game last year, and that was my Missouri game for the year.
Pro tip: he has the phonetic spelling in his Twitter account.
Oh, okay.
Pro tip.
There it is. So we got Kevin McGuffey and Mike Laval. You catch them on Last Word in College Football, and they will get you updated on the SEC and the nation as we get set for 2018. We are carving our way through the SEC. We've knocked out the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and we will continue hopefully next week and throughout the summer in setting you up for the SEC 2018. And, of course, Kevin on Kentucky, Mike on Tennessee, as we get closer and closer to SEC Media Days that are only like 3 weeks away.
July 15th through the 18th, I believe, off the top of my head. I can check.
Yeah, that sounds right. It's crazy to think that we're less than 2 months from, basically about 2 months away from the start of football season. So it'll be here before we know it, and I can't wait.
And once the media days hit, then it all goes downhill. We're straight into the season.
Yeah, on the home stretch, July 16th through the 19th, I was a day off. Yeah, you go with media days, you get some coverage out of that, and then camp starts, the first of September, late August, first of August, first week in August for 3 or 4 weeks, and then we start the season. So after media days is over, really, you got a couple of weeks before you can start really getting some feedback from campus.
So we've got some clamoring for the top 5 punters and then the top 5 long snappers.
Ooh. Going to the well there.
Absolutely. We do have to rate the coaches too. We'll have to do that at some point as well.
Hey, but yeah, that's an interesting question. Top 5 long snappers. There's some conversation in the recruiting circles about these teams who are signing long snappers on scholarship. I talked about Dawson Knox at Ole Miss being a former walk-on. I've noticed that almost every team now is bringing on scholarship guys, one usually every 2 years, who just do long snapping. You used to have a guy that was a backup linebacker, and then he became a long snapper, and then maybe the NFL would sign him to the practice squad or a UFA contract. But it's gotten to the point, football is so specialized now. It's a very interesting question, actually. Football is so specialized now that the guys are getting full ride scholarships to Power 5 programs, almost every one, just to long snap.
I know these scouts are detailed, but if they can distinguish the top long snapper in the nation, or even amongst the top 50 of them, that would be something.
Mark, they have high school special teams camps now where long snappers and holders and kickers. I mean, that's the only people that go. Punters, kickoff guys, holders, and long snappers in high school. There are guys in high school who just long snap. That's what they do. That's how specialized the sport is getting. But, used to your holder and your snapper, long snapper, usually like walk-on guys, or maybe a scholarship backup linebacker that did it in high school. But now you have now almost all those guys are on scholarship. I think the only position you see out there that's probably still a predominantly non-scholarship guy is your holder.
All right, folks, we enjoy the conversation each and every time, of course, with Mike Laval and Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football. We ask that you subscribe if you like the content here, and even if you disagree. That doesn't mean you can't like the content, but still disagree with us, because that's what it's all about, the discussion, the debate, and the analysis here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Guys, appreciate it. You did yeoman's work tonight, because I did very little here in listening to you guys run down your expertise at the SEC at wide receiver and tight end.
Mark, always a pleasure to join us. Encourage your readers to come out and see lastwordoncollegefootball.com. Got some great stuff out there, some stuff from this week. What does relegation look like? Did a book review on Tennessee's, the first definitive account of Tennessee's fiasco of a coaching search in 2017 called Decade of Dysfunction. Kevin has, I'll let him tell you about it, but he had a piece last week about early SEC East predictions. A lot of good content this week as we start revving up for the regular season. Please check us out.
Yep. Agree totally. Everyone, please come check it out. There's a lot of good stuff up there. There's a post today about the 30 greatest games of the last 30 years. I think the first part of a series. I've got, we've been talking about rivalries like here, here with you, Mark, and then also on the side, I'm working on Kentucky's biggest rival with Louisville. I've got a post to be done tomorrow, hopefully go up later in the week, basically looking at the top 5 games between Kentucky and Louisville since they started playing again. This will be the 25th. This will be the 25th meeting this year since they reinstated the battle for the Governor's Cup. So counting down basically the top 5, the top 5 most memorable games.
So I'm anticipating to go to your write-up on the SEC Eastern Division in your predictions, Kevin, to see that Vandy's winning it all this year.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
Alabama's going to win the East and the West. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. No, I'm
That's
surprised Mike hasn't given me some
college
grief because
football, along with Clemson winning in the ACC Atlantic, I think. If anybody can get past Georgia this year, I would be a bit surprised.
yeah, I was waiting for Mike to give me some grief because I did pick Kentucky ahead of Tennessee this year, and because I think I had Kentucky 4th and then Missouri 5th and I think Tennessee 6th. But I also with the caveat that I don't think Tennessee is going to stay. I think Jeremy Pruitt is a really good hire, and I don't think they're going to stay at the bottom of the league for long. I think they'll be back up towards the top where they've customarily been. But
yeah, if you think we're obnoxious now, wait till we get good again.
Yay! Can't wait.
All right, guys, I appreciate it. We will stay in touch.
All right, thank you very much as always.
Thanks, Mark.